if you can get a property that also has an income layer to it, not only do you take advantage of it going up in value, but if you can get income for part of that property, give it a couple of years and you could trade up. The best time to buy real estate is always today. And the next best time to buy real estate is tomorrow.
Welcome to season 2 of our podcast, Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering, with me, Joseph Alcantara. This season, we'll hear from inspiring experts who are continuously thriving while making meaningful breakthroughs in their careers, advocacies, and personal lives. Before we dive in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you're always updated every time we have a new podcast or a new video episode. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Jason Muth, a full-time real estate investor, entrepreneur, and co-founder of Prideaway Stays in Provincetown here in Massachusetts. Jason transitioned from a successful corporate career to become a thriving entrepreneur in the real estate and short-term rental industry. That's very, very interesting. So let's explore his journey and discover the keys to his success that we'll for sure learn a lot from. Please welcome to the pod, Jason. Hi, Jason.
What's up, Joseph? Thanks for having me on today.
Of course. Thank you so much for saying yes to this invite. So let's dive right in. I know your story. I read your profile. I am very much interested to find out how everything started and why you are doing what you are doing today. So what is your meaningful life story? Please take us back to your origin story, your background, your lived experience that led you to what you're doing today.
All right. Well, since I am older than you, my story is probably longer, but I will try to keep it short. I grew up outside New York City, great family, very middle-class upbringing, only child. My parents are still alive, still in the same house that I grew up in. So we visit them on occasion. I went to college in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to Brown University back in the 90s, but before they redid downtown Providence. If anyone here is in New England, Providence was a little bit rougher back in the day, but I loved my time there. I was supposed to go into med school, but instead I fell in love with the radio business. There was a great radio station in Providence that was connected to Brown University, which is no longer in existence, but my formative years were connected to 95.5 WBRU, which is an alternative rock radio station. And, I was always a big music fan growing up. But, I thought it was important to have the credibility of a career in medicine. I thought it led to riches and esteem. And that's why I was going in that direction. I was pretty good at science and math growing up. But no one really was coaching me as to what I should be doing. It just kind of felt like you should go the traditional route of one of the subjects that we learned in high school and then proceed in college in that vein. I remember I finally was able to realize I can carve my own path the summer before I got to college when I got in as an engineer. I was actually going to, potentially go to engineering school. And then when it came time to pick the advisor for my class, engineers had to just write down engineering, but everybody else got to pick from all these fabulous classes at Brown. And I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this restriction right now. So I'm going to switch. So I switched immediately, and that's fine. Like, they don't accept you. And then if you want to switch, they won't let you come there. So I switched immediately. And then when I got there, I took like the most advanced calculus class I could because I did so well in calc back in high school, and then said, listen, I don't even know why I'm learning math anymore. Like, this is irrelevant to me. So I was starting to have those feelings of like, I don't need to go down the pathway that was subscribed to me during all my years in high school. And then once I realized that radio was, really attractive to me, I found my way into a career in the media business for over 25 years, which is a really tough business. I mean, like, I love the media, I feel really great. But one thing I've said is that eventually it doesn't love you back. Because it keeps consolidating. I mean, Paramount just announced a number of layoffs this week, and that's just what this business is. So I survived in it for a long time. Worked in radio, worked in television. I worked for Comcast, which is part of NBC Universal, for many years. I worked for a local radio company here in Boston for a while. I was a sales manager for about half that time and on the research team for the other half. And it just felt really natural to me. But eventually your expiration date comes up, and we were actually deciding to do real estate on the side back about almost 10 years ago at this point. We bought our first investment in 2016. We're recording this in 2024 right now. And we were always doing that on the side until I realized that that was actually probably the right pathway forward for my next chapter. So I call this chapter 2 because I'd worked in the media for so long. When that career ended, I was already kind of transitioning into this career in the real estate space. And one quick tip and piece of advice I always give people is to start to build your next plan, your chapter 2 while you're still in your chapter 1, or your chapter 3 while you're still in your chapter 2. Because if the day comes where you say, I'm done with this, I don't want to be doing it anymore, or the company says, I don't want you here anymore, that's a really abrupt change. And if you don't have somewhere to immediately transition your energy because you've been working on that for a couple of years on the side, it might be really difficult for you to do some investigation as to what you want to do next. So long story short, 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, I got a phone call saying that the position I was in was no more. And this was not the first time that I've been in a position that was severed. And, it's not a big deal because every time I found something even better for the next stage of my career. Sometimes when you're in the same company or the same role for too long, you kind of need something to shake you out of it. And the comfort zone that we're all in our positions, maybe you as a listener have been in your position for a number of years, and you like it, it's easy, you're not inspired anymore, but it's hard to leave because you like the people and you like what they're paying you. It might not be the right situation for you in the future if you're not kind of building those foundations for the next thing. So that's what was happening toward the end of my time in the media business. And it was a very happy moment when I got that phone call saying that I no longer had a position there, because I was going to resign in a few months after that happened, or find a way to be part of a severance that they had. But I didn't have to, because they brought that opportunity to me. So I already knew what I was going to do next, hit the ground running, focused in on the short-term rental properties that we owned at the time, which we still own. We have 5 properties, 4 that are in New Hampshire, 1 in Provincetown. And then the company that you alluded to during the introduction, Prideaway Stays, I'm wearing the logo right here. That was because I felt more and more comfortable with the new role that I was in, working as a short-term rental expert, co-host, property owner, someone that was just getting really, really good at this space. And I said, what market that we're in could be best served by me and the skills that I've learned to serve owners and guests. And, instead of New Hampshire, which is where we have the majority of the properties we own, I picked Provincetown, where we did have a property, because I felt very connected to the LGBTQ plus community and to the short-term rental space. And I didn't think anybody was doing it particularly well that served that market specifically. So I said, I think this is an opportunity for me to go in there, build a fun brand, learn a little bit more along the way about what it's like to run this business. And it's been a great start.
Love that. I love that entire narrative of your life story, Jason. And what I've gathered there, and I want to unpack everything here, is that from the very beginning, from the get-go, you're not the type who would be a security blanket hugger, because you pretty much understood what you like, what you don't like, what you like for the moment, and then after potentially, maximizing everything on that experience, moving on to the next chapter. I love how you've mentioned when you were younger that, yes, you have this fascination about science and becoming a doctor or getting into medicine, and then eventually getting into engineering, loving calculus, which is very rare, by the way, for a lot of kids, including myself out there, and then eventually landing into broadcasting and media, which by default is also based on your decision. You were not afraid to pivot. You're not afraid to explore new things, which led you to what you are doing today. Was that something that's very innate to you when you were growing up, or were you trained that way by your family, by your parents, or it's just something that life threw at you and then you have to learn how to go through it that eventually led to your success today?
I don't think it's innate in me at all. Like I think that somehow, I think a lot about luck, both in the real estate world and in my life. And, you know, I find myself to be a very lucky person, but I also think that I put myself in the situations where luck can reward me. So that doesn't necessarily mean that just luck keeps shining down upon me. It means that I feel like I've made some smart choices along the way where a lucky situation can take me to where I want to be. My upbringing was very much like study hard. I went to a private school in Westchester County. My parents put me there. I was there for 10 years from third grade till 12th. I still love that school, Hackley School in Tarrytown, New York. And, that helped me get to the next stage of my life, which was Brown. And Brown helped me get into the radio industry. Um, Brown is interesting, is that they kind of want you to follow your bliss. And if you don't like any of the majors that are there, you could make your own, find an advisor and make your own. That's kind of what that school is. Without having those guardrails though, I do think it's dangerous for some people. I was probably one of these people where it was dangerous for us, where if we didn't have the right coaching and putting us on the right pathway, I could see me leading a bit of a rudderless life. And I look back at everything now, and I think that some of the entrepreneurship and financial responsibility that I've learned in my later life, it would be nice if these are things that we're teaching children, and maybe we are teaching them now, but that we're teaching them, all throughout junior high, high school, and into college. I felt like I was very much on a pathway to go into a traditional profession that college, spit you out into. You want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be an investment banker, you want to be a consultant, you want to be an educator. I feel like that's kind of what the traditional pathway was. I mean, who the heck had a pathway to get into the media business? Like there are pathways. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but nobody showed me that pathway. Like I just kind of found my way into an industry that I thought was super interesting. And this is before downloads and iTunes and everything. I mean, radio was just a behemoth back in the 80s and 90s. It's still around today. It's just in a very different state. So, like I don't think anybody said to me, this is the pathway that you should do. I just kind of fell into it. And then one step falls into the next. The one thing that I was having a struggle with early on in my 20s is, the jobs in the media business, when you come out of college, are not that lucrative. Like they don't pay you that much money. I was working weekends at a radio station, and, it's a low hourly wage to do the work that I was doing. And I wanted to use my mind. I thought that esteem, was very important to me. Like having gone to a good school, having studied really hard, and having done well academically, it felt like I wasn't able to use that skill if I was going to go into this media business. But I eventually found my way into a career path in the media world that allowed me to feel proud of the work that I was doing. And that was on the research and consulting side. I worked for what eventually became a division of iHeartMedia. I worked there for about 9 years. I was on the road as a consultant doing focus groups everywhere, working with high-level program directors and general managers and sales teams. And, I was doing this all through my 20s. And it was great. It was such a fantastic way to spend, like my post-college years, seeing the world. I mean, seeing a lot of inside of hotel rooms, but like seeing cities around the world that I would have never gone to if I didn't have the chance to go there, working with clients. Realizing that I was in an industry that I appreciated, and I was doing work that I had to use my head to do. It wasn't just a mindless job. But eventually that kind of ran its course, and I moved to Boston and wanted to form more of a life here. And being on the road all the time was really difficult. So, that's when I made that conscious pivot away from that life on the road. And that eventually got me into local media jobs. So, I worked in the greater Boston. I live in Newburyport, Massachusetts right now, just north of Boston, but I was in Boston for 20 years. And I basically did the circuit that a lot of people in the Boston media world do. You work for one company for a couple of years, you work for this company for a couple of years, a boss leaves and goes to this other company and they pull you over there. One risk that people have if they stay around too long is you might find yourself toward the back half of your career in a field that no longer has a use for you. And if you didn't make that move to do something different with your life, you could be stuck the last 10, 15 years of what you're supposed to use as like really good working years, left reinventing yourself. I see it happen all the time in that industry. They just continue to cut. And I see these people that are my age that I don't know if they know what they want to do next. I mean, like, I'm just so grateful that I discovered real estate investing back in 2015, 2016. And I didn't even realize that that first investment that we made was going to inspire such a interesting second chapter in my career that's put me in the point where I feel like I'm a great expert in the short-term rental space. I've built this amazing network of people who do what I do across the country at a very high level. They're really smart, they're good at it, they're great to their guests and their hosts, they're good real estate investors. And I was like, whoa, this is a completely different community that I had no idea existed. And I just fell into this too. But again, going back to my point on luck, I don't think it was lucky that I did it. I think I found another interesting way to spend my time. I mean, my husband's a real estate attorney and a real estate broker, so it was a natural conversation for us to be having on these long drives that we'd be doing or whatever. So before our daughter came along, we used to go to these real estate meetups all the time, and just start meeting people. And I realized there was a world of people who wanted to meet us, and teach us what they knew. So, that's kind of how I ended up with this second chapter that was so clearly laid out in my head that once the media business ended, it didn't matter. I already knew what I was going to do next. I was already doing it.
Love that, Jason. I mean, I know that you've mentioned luck, but I know that your situation right now is not sheer luck because you work so hard for it. And then I think you intentionally, since you've mentioned earlier that you have to have a backup plan, you have to have like the next chapter that you would want to open even before that happens, whether, it's serendipitously happened that it's real estate or something else for other people. I think being mindful and having that strategic plan as plan B or plan C would be very much helpful. And in your experience, it's real estate, right? How did you land on it? How did you plan for it between 2015 and 2024 right now? What was the journey like? What were the challenges like? And how did you navigate that journey to thrive today?
So taking back to 2015, I mean, I found a community called Bigger Pockets, and Bigger Pockets it's one of the biggest real estate investment communities online. It's free to join. There's some tiers that you can, get a higher membership level, but it's basically where I got a great education in real estate. They had an amazing podcast, which they still have, and they just switched out their host to a really great guy named Dave Meyer. But they used to have two guys, Brandon Turner and Josh Dorkin, that were the hosts of that podcast. They'd have a lot of people on that were everyday investors, and you'd get to hear their stories, and you'd be inspired as a newbie saying, if they could do this, I could do this too. And the podcast evolved over time, and suddenly there's this big influencer culture around real estate, and they have these massive conventions. I went to one of their conventions, BPCon, a couple of years ago. There were a couple thousand people in San Diego that went. And I don't know if they had the aspiration it was going to be that large, but the influencer space with people talking about themselves in the real estate world is just filled with people, a lot of whom are just blowhards, but a lot of them are really good. And I think that deep down, Bigger Pockets is still the place to start if you want to get into understanding real estate investing. So we did that deep dive around 2015, where we used to listen to the podcast all the time. I was on the forums. I built a profile there. And, that was my starting point. And I think that when we started going to meetups and meeting other humans that were in the greater Boston area that looked like us, that talked like us, they were professionals and they did this on the side, it inspired us to say, you know what, we can do this too. And what they say in the real estate investing world is the people that aren't successful with it are the ones that just kind of never get started. We took that leap back in 2016 and bought a second home up in New Hampshire. And I remember I still have the same exact mortgage right now. It's a $691 payment on that mortgage. It's there's only $100,000 left on it, but the property's worth almost $5 at this point. It's done really well for us as a great second home. We've had a lot of memories that we've made there. We've improved the home. We've shared it with lots of guests that have stayed over the years. And we're doing all the right things. Like it's a great way to build wealth by paying that mortgage down and taking advantage of tax benefits and using it and being a good community member at the lake that we have that property on. When we decided to buy that property, I happened to have a little bit of money that I saved up from, I think it was stock in Comcast, actually. I participated in the employee stock purchase program. And I was probably 5 years into my career at that division. It was a local sales division of Comcast. Right now they're called Effective. But at the time they were called Comcast Spotlight. And I was probably ready for my next thing. 5-6 years in a position or at a company these days, that's a long time. So, I think in the back of my head, I was saying, well, what's the next step for me at this company? Or is the next step outside this company? But I was getting an itch and I was starting to get bored. And I said, you know what, like maybe real estate might be something interesting. So let's buy that second home. And I think that this thing called Airbnb, I'd never done anything on it before, but I was like, I could probably figure this thing out. So, we went ahead and took the leap and bought that property and had no idea what we were doing, but we learned everything along the way. And, that one purchase, like literally has put us on this completely different pathway that I couldn't even imagine if we hadn't made that decision back then where I'd be right now.
Wow. So you took the effort to learn, you took the effort to be part of a community. You took a big jump by taking that risk head first without exactly knowing if it will work or not, but glad it worked out. And now you're on your continuous expansion or growth. And you've mentioned Airbnb, trying or testing new waters that you haven't seen before. Um, for someone who's listening today, who, for example, yes, I have some sort of savings that I can, use for investment. I have that, experience professionally in my back pocket that I can potentially use. How can we dive head down and straight in without, of course, there are financial repercussions, there are risks involved. We can probably ask you, Jason, like, we don't know if this will work out or not. How do we begin?
So I had confidence in myself that I knew that I had more runway in the career path that I was on. You never know what's going to happen at a company. I mean, like I actually left that company in March of 2016 to go join the company that I just left a couple of years ago. And I left on my own accord. It was amicable. I left to move up into a new role with this other local media company. Had I not done that, I think that my position at Comcast would have been cut within the next year and a half or 2 years because they did a big reorg. They had a bunch of people reapply for jobs and they eliminated a couple positions. So I kind of timed that really well. So one thing I would say is if you think you've been around somewhere for too long, I wouldn't be afraid to explore what else is out there within that company or elsewhere, because companies look at the tenure that you're in and they see how long you're there. And, gone are the days where they want you to work there for 30 years. They don't. They want to, if the position can get cut and refilled at a lower level with a different title for half the salary, they're going to do that. So with that said, I think it's important that people always have their head in a swivel and see what's happening at the company you're working for. In the real estate world, if you're asking kind of how to get started with that, it's very different today versus, a decade ago or even 5 years ago, given where interest rates are, inventory levels. There's been a lot of changes on both those things. Whereas, you can get a 3% loan a few years ago. Now you're getting a 6 or 6.5% loan. What I will say, though, is over time, real estate has always been a great tried and true investment. Just look at the big picture, okay? There are huge cohorts of people that are in their 30s and 40s right now and 20s, right? Generation Y, Gen Z, millennials, like these are like big groups of folks. I'm Gen X. We're a little small group, okay? All those people need places to live. They need things to do, and they're not building enough real estate for everybody, okay? So I just think the macro trends are going to favor the people that make the investments and make the bets. If you're making a bet on a 6% loan right now or a 6.5% loan right now, make sure the numbers could work right now, but who knows, you might be able to reinvest or refinance that in a couple of years if rates do come down. They're just not building enough real estate, and people are living longer. and they're holding on to it for a longer period of time. So the demand is just going to continue to be there. Now, some markets are going to have more demand than others. During the pandemic, a lot of markets got really hot and they've now kind of sizzled off. The Northeast is one that has just really stood the test of time and has been really steady Eddie for a long time, which is why I like investing here. But one thing I would advise folks is to try to get that first investment however you can. If you're renting, try to get an FHA loan and put 3.5% down on a property. Maybe you'll find a multifamily property somewhere in or outside Boston or one of the gateway cities here in the Northeast that you could rent out the other unit and start to build some equity in that property and have somebody else help pay your mortgage. That's really a way that Bigger Pockets taught people how to do things 10 years ago. And I think that that's actually probably still true if you're able to find that multifamily property. Where you are in your life matters though. Like if you're younger, single, dating, commit a relationship, maybe just got married, you might be more amenable to having a co-living situation where you have a side by side or, 3 condos in one building, like triple deckers here in New England are very classic, kind of style of architecture. They all used to be, apartments or single family homes back in the day. They've been converted into condos right now. But that's a great way to really just start building some equity through real estate. I see people that make the mistake all the time where they just want that dream home. So the first home they get, is that super expensive home in the suburbs that generates zero income. Like it is not an income property at all. It's just an expense. And you're now only left, hoping that it will go up in value. If you can get a property that also has an income layer to it, not only do you take advantage of it going up in value, but if you can get income for part of that property, give it a couple of years and you could trade up. And now you're trading up with a bulk of money, with some equity that you could trade up. And if you're lucky enough, if you're still working your job, you've saved up some money, maybe your spouse is also working, you might be able to keep that property and then buy a better property in the future. And now you have 2 income properties, or you have the previous property now might have 2 units or 3 units generating income. So I do think there's still ways to do it today. It's a little different with the way real estate interest rates are. But, the best time to buy real estate is always today. And the next best time to buy real estate is tomorrow. Like it's usually a really, really solid bet. And I'm really confident in the way that we have these massive generations of people that are working their way through young and middle adulthood, that it's not going to go. We just had a global pandemic, right? And that still didn't shake the market up, to make it favorable to people who really need to buy. We lost a lot of people during that pandemic, but there's a lot more people that are around that still need to buy real estate. And a lot of people still are living longer, so they're holding on to what they have. It is tough for a lot of young people to kind of make that first step, but we all did it.
That's great piece of advice. A lot of advice that are really very practical and I think actionable that people who are listening wherever they are in their life stage should consider. Now I'd want to shift gears and talk about Prideaway Stays because I was very much fascinated when I saw your profile and how you're building that brand, and how I wish that I knew you before we went to Provincetown this year, because Provincetown is one of, well, for those people who probably are not familiar with Provincetown, it's the most queer friendly, LGBTQ plus friendly community within Massachusetts, and everyone simply embrace each other within that community. We know that it's very competitive, in that area. But what fascinates me is that you decided to create a brand for what you're doing, a community, and specific differentiated offerings that probably allows your brand and your properties to stand out versus the huge competition in that community. And knowing your research and media and marketing background, I am not surprised that you've applied all those 20 plus years of experience to what you are now building. So can you take us through that journey and talk about this Prideaway Stays that you are building and how differentiated it is versus your competition, especially in that area?
So Provincetown is, I think it's the gayest place in the country, right? It just is, right? People from all over the world, right? We're recording this during Carnival Week. It's the biggest week of the year in Provincetown. I mean, tens and tens and tens of thousands of people. We were there last week when we were driving out of Provincetown back down Cape over the bridge. Like the traffic from Provincetown through Truro, Wellfleet to into Eastham, coming into town was amazing, right? There were just so many people going to town for Carnival Week. That's what happens every year. It's a very seasonal market. So it's super duper busy in the summertime. The shoulder seasons, I think, are the best times to visit for people who've never been there before or want to get a taste of P-Town without having the massive crowds. So the fall is gorgeous there. The late spring is really good, and the Provincetown Business Guild does a fantastic job in keeping events throughout the year. So, P-Town is pretty much busy. It's open year round. It's busy probably from May through December, the busiest month of July and August. So we owned a property there dating back to 2018. So we bought a condo there and that was our second investment property, our second short-term rental. We bought it shortly before our daughter was born. When we purchased it, we didn't know that she was forthcoming. We adopted our daughter. I've spoken about this on other podcasts, and I tell friends about, our adoption journey. So we bought the property intending to use it and rent it. And then when she came along, we realized we'd probably be renting it a little bit more than we'd expected. But she comes to Provincetown frequently. We've been to Family Week a number of times. We didn't go this year, but the past couple of years we've been to Family Week. We're planning to go again next year, which is an amazing time for LGBTQ plus families of all types to bring their kids to the Cape and have a really fun experience together. Single parents, double parents, double daddies, moms, gender, gender is not an issue there. So non-binary people bring their kids. A lot of non-binary kids are there as well. It's a place to feel comfortable and realize that family is a lot more than, what we've seen on TV for many decades. So that's the kind of market Provincetown is. It's extremely expensive. Usually gay people have this aspiration to have that second place in P-Town. So like if you've fallen in love in Provincetown, or if you've fallen in love with Provincetown, what people naturally want to do next is buy a place in Provincetown because they tend to visit frequently. A lot of folks will have two homes where maybe P-Town is their summer residence and somewhere else that's warmer might be their winter residence. As people work in DC, New York, Philly, Boston, a lot of these big cities, they have these great jobs earning big city money that they're able to put down on a property in Provincetown that if they rent it out for a number of years when they're not using it, now they're going to have a fully paid off property that they could use for retirement many years later. And a lot of people aspire to do that. There's not a ton of development in Provincetown because it's the very, very tip of Cape Cod. So there's really nowhere to build. There's sand dunes everywhere and there's water on all sides of you. So as such, since demand is huge and there's not a ton of new development happening, the real estate prices are very expensive. So we know that people usually have this lifelong dream when they buy in P-Town. It's not a tried and true investment market like other ones where people are just going to invest and not use their properties. There's a lot of markets like that, especially in the short-term rental space. The Smoky Mountains are probably the most classic one where everyone in the podcast world were talking about the Smoky Mountains. So you had investors from across the country that were buying these beautiful cabins in the Smoky Mountains and they were never using them. They were buying them specifically to rent them out to other people and to make money with it. Our thesis on P-Town is very different because we know that people that buy there want to use their properties. We also know that when you get that first mortgage payment, it could be a shock where you're like, oh yeah, this is a little bit more than me just renting a week in P-Town. Like I got to pay this thing every single month for 30 years. How am I going to do that? Well, some people are independently wealthy, have done super well. They're putting cash down on properties and they don't need the income because they have great jobs and all the power to them. If they want to use their property that way, they're entitled to do it. It's their real estate. But most people that buy in P-Town as a second home, especially these days, realize that they need a bit of an income level where they need money coming in to help subsidize that property so it won't cost them as much to be able to have it. That's where we come in because, Provincetown is a market where there's about 1,000 short-term rentals throughout the town. There is a certificate program that the town requires owners to register their property and adhere to certain rules and parameters. Um, so we don't need to have all those clients. I mean, like, we just need a handful. We're a boutique company. We don't need to be one of the big national companies where Provincetown is just one of their many markets, or even one of the companies that's focusing on Cape Cod. I mean, Cape Cod has tons of towns on it. You're dealing with, Dennis and Harwich and Falmouth and all these different places that cater to lots of different types of people, mostly straight. And Provincetown is just one town on their list. We're zeroing in just on P-Town because we know how to speak to LGBTQ plus people. We know how to speak short-term rentals. So we have that unique blend that nobody else has. There's other real estate agents that are in P-Town that might do some short-term rentals on the side, but they don't have the deep, deep knowledge of understanding pricing, guest communication, optimization, how to photograph the property for short-term rentals, and how to troubleshoot. Like, they might know a couple things. Like, maybe they know a handyman in town, or maybe they know where to send you if you're looking for a special place for dinner, but they don't know the rest of that stuff. So we think that we know, and we're always learning more, but we think that we know all of those things really well, or at least well. Okay, so we have a network of people in Provincetown that serve our properties: cleaners, handymen, service people. We understand how to set properties up, from a technological perspective, both with on-site tech, and how to market the property using Airbnb, Vrbo, direct booking websites, how to communicate with guests, how to have interactive guidebooks, what guests are asking for, like how to, address recurring questions that come up over and over.
That is great. And I love how you double down on what you're passionate about, focusing on that niche and having, folks or tools working with you to bring that brand and that company to life for the audience and the target segment that you're catering to. One of the key things that I'm really advocating for, and the reason why we're doing this podcast, is I love mentorship and I love mentoring. And the way you've unselfishly given all those tips, tricks, secret sauce. Now it's not secret because you've given that to everyone. For me, is a reflection of how you're giving back to the community where you learn from, and the future community members who might potentially be part of the real estate industry that you've inspired today, especially the younger folks. You've also alluded to the fact that you would want to somehow do things that are meaningful to you, which is the reason why we are talking about this topic in this podcast. So first of the last question would be, is this intentional when it comes to you mentoring, giving back, teaching, podcasting to that community who might be interested, in the industry where you're in right now, having experience both that, opening of chapter 2 for you, and also at the same time you have that background in broadcasting. That's why probably podcasting is so damn easy for you. And then the second and the final question for you is, what does a meaningful life mean to a Jason today, and how do you live that every single day of your life?
Giving back to the community of people, I think there's a little bit of selfishness, frankly, because I think it's important. It was important to me 2 years ago to rebrand myself away from the life that I was and what everybody in my professional world knew me as. They knew that I had real estate stuff on the side. Like, we talk a lot at work. Like, people would always ask me questions about real estate investing and short-term rentals, almost more than digital marketing as time went on. And I was like, this is really interesting. This is the questions I'm getting right now. But it was important to me to rebrand myself. All right. And I said, when I left, I think I recorded a video or made a post saying, I'm going to give myself like 18 months or something to set myself up in the best position I can. I'm going to invest in myself, invest in education, and I'm going to see where things are after those 18 months. And like, once I hit those 18 months, I was like, there's no way I'm going back to work for anybody else. Like, this is what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. I love the freedom that my life has in terms of time freedom and the money that we're bringing in, and the lives that we're influencing. But the selfishness was that I needed to rebrand myself. It was super important for me to no longer be the digital marketing or digital sales director for a local media company that happened to be doing these real estate things on the side. I wanted to become the expert in this space. I'm not the only expert in this space, but I wanted to be an expert in this space. So I feel like everything I've done over these past couple of years not only has, figured out a way to bring money in for the business, grow what we're doing, but also in the minds of my peers, see me as this. And Family Week aside, the vast majority of LGBTQ plus people do not have kids. Okay. Most of the world that we know in Boston, they're just childless. They are. And like, it's just very different having a child. It's not like a dog. It's not. And all the gays that have their dogs that treat them as children, I adore that. We had a dog. I loved her. She lived for a great life, and she passed a few years ago. But it's just completely different. So I think that the meaning has changed for me since having a daughter. I look at her and I say, well, how can I impart her on the pathway where she could be bold and fearless, but I could also guide her down that road and not just let her run amok into traffic, right? So I think that the purpose that I have now is not just the selfishness of rebranding myself and, earning more money for us and living out the rest of my life in a fabulous way through travel and real estate, whatever. We now have a life that we have to guide down the right road and set her up well.
That's beautiful. I love it, because I think for people who have this impression about real estate, inspired by what they see on Netflix, like Selling Sunset, it's all about the bling, all about the money, all about the income. And hearing it straight from you, the real meaning that you talked about is your family, your daughter, and her future. That's really very refreshing and inspiring. And I hope that other folks who would be in that journey of doing their own plans when it comes to entrepreneurship will also have a deeper sense of meaning that's not rooted on simply the arbitrary goals that we see based on the practical needs that we have, but will be something deeper.
One thing I should kind of end with is, I don't get me wrong, I know my numbers really well. I look at them every day. All right. And I think that knowing what the numbers are in my head and on my computer and where I keep all my numbers, that inspires me to have the confidence that I can live the life I want to live right now. But you got to build up to have those numbers. I mean, like, in my opinion, money is just numbers on screens these days, right? But I know what those numbers are for us. And that says to me, okay, take a breath. Things are going well. You know your numbers. They keep going in the right direction. I don't just ignore them, right? I do not advise that. Like, don't get yourself into debt. At one point this year, my credit score hit 850. So not only do I know my numbers, but my credit score hit the highest it can, right? Like, so I know all the numbers. Like, I know all these numbers. And like, I think that financial literacy and understanding your finances is paramount to anything. Like, it just is. It allows us to live the happy life that we want. Like, I don't need to have the most numbers of anybody. I just need to have enough numbers to enjoy the life that I want to live.
100% agreed. And I love how you have meshed the balance of really knowing your goals, working through it, and knowing what's happening, but at the back of that as well, knowing the reason why you're doing it. And with that, Jason, I learned a lot, and I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening to this learned a lot as well. So how can they best reach out to you, or if they're interested to, do their rental as well and rent your properties as well, which channel should they go to so they can find out more?
So jasonmuth.com, Muth is my last name. That will get you to links to everything that's connected to me. If you want to check out Prideaway Stays, you can go to prideawaystays.com. You can find me on LinkedIn through my name. You can find me on Instagram. Pretty easy to find.
Sounds good. And again, thank you so much, Jason, for this conversation. You've inspired a lot of us, and good luck on the next chapters that's ahead for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph.